My name is Meredith Hayes, and at 25, one dinner changed my life forever. It was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party, and my family had gathered around the dining table in Birmingham, Alabama. The clink of glasses filled the air as my mother raised hers, her lips curling into a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Some children make you proud," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Others just exist." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting for me to shrink back like I always had. I didn't. I leaned into my chair, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Even existing comes with a price, Mom," I said, my tone calm but edged with steel. Her smile faltered. She forced a brittle laugh. "And what price is that, Meredith?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I let the moment stretch, savoring the tension, then smirked. "A house 1,000 miles away." I paused, letting it sink in. "That's where I live now." The table froze. My sister's fork clattered against her plate. My father looked down, unable to meet my eyes. My mother's face twisted, caught somewhere between shock and regret. I didn't wait for anyone to speak. I stood up, leaving the silence behind to swallow my words. That night, I realized some tables aren't worth sitting at, and I was done trying to belong. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you most? Share your story below. Where did you finally find your place? Stay tuned, this is just the beginning of how I built mine. Growing up in Birmingham, my house always felt like it belonged to someone else. My sister was the golden child, the one my mother pinned all her hopes on. She was destined to be a lawyer, her path lined with polished oak and courtroom victories. I was the afterthought, the girl who spent hours hunched over a sewing machine in her room, stitching scraps into dreams my mother dismissed as pointless hobbies. My love for fashion design wasn't just ignored, it was mocked, brushed off as a waste of time. I was about 10 when I first noticed the difference. My sister, 3 years older, would come home with debate trophies, and my mother would beam, her voice warm with pride. "You're going places," she'd say, resting her hand on my sister's shoulder. I'd sit at the dinner table clutching a sketchbook full of dress designs, waiting for my turn. It never came. My father, always quiet, would nod at my sister's stories but barely glance my way. I learned early to keep my dreams small, tucked away, like the fabric swatches under my bed. By high school, sewing had become my escape. My bedroom turned into a sanctuary filled with the hum of my old Singer machine as I turned thrift store finds into something new. My friend Monica was the only one who understood. She'd sit cross-legged on my floor, flipping through my sketches and saying, "You're gonna make it big, Mer." Her words kept me going, a flicker of hope, in a house that felt like a stage for someone else's story. One memory still stings. I was 15 when I entered a local design contest, pouring weeks into a dress made from recycled denim. I won first place, my name printed in the school newsletter. I came home clutching the certificate, my heart racing with pride. I thought maybe this time they'd see me. I showed it to my mother, expecting a smile, maybe even a hug. Instead, she glanced at it, handed it back, and said flatly, "That's nice, Meredith. But let's not get carried away with these little projects." Then she turned away, already talking about my sister's acceptance into a pre-law program. That night, she threw a party to celebrate my sister's achievement, streamers, cake, neighbors filling the living room. I stood in the corner, my certificate crumpled in my hand, invisible. My father didn't say anything. He never did. He sat in his armchair reading the paper, letting my mother's words fill the space. I wanted to scream to make him look at me, but I didn't. I went back to my room, stitched another seam, and promised myself I'd prove them wrong. Monica came by the next day, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "They don't get it," she said, handing me a new sketchbook. "But you will." School wasn't much better. Teachers praised my sister's eloquence, her ability to argue any point. I was the quiet one, the girl who'd rather draw than speak. Still, I kept entering contests, each win a small rebellion. My mother never attended the ceremonies. She'd say she was busy or that my sister had a mock trial. My father would mumble "good job" if I mentioned it, his eyes never leaving the TV. Eventually, I stopped expecting them to notice. By senior year, I'd saved enough from babysitting to buy better fabric, building a portfolio that might get me out. I'd stay up late, stitching under a dim lamp, imagining a world where my designs mattered. Monica would sneak over with coffee and encouragement. "You're different, Mir," she'd say. "That's your strength." I clung to her words, letting them drown out my mother's voice in my head, the one that said I'd never be enough. Looking back, those years shaped me. Every slight, every ignored sketch, every moment I was pushed aside for my sister's spotlight, they built a fire in me. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I couldn't stay in a house that refused to see me. My sewing machine became my rebellion, each stitch a step toward something greater. I wasn't just sewing clothes, I was stitching my way out. The letter came on a rainy Tuesday, tucked inside a plain white envelope. I was 18, standing in our Birmingham kitchen, my fingers trembling as I opened it. The words leaped off the page. I had been accepted to a prestigious design school in New York with a full scholarship. For the first time, I saw a way out, a path that belonged to me. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and thrill, but I knew showing the letter to my mother would start another war. That evening, I slid it across the dinner table. My mother's eyes darted over the page, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Design school," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "Meredith, you need a real career like your sister's. Law is stable. This is just a fantasy." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "It's not a fantasy, Mom," I said quietly, steadying my voice. "It's what I want." She gave a cold laugh that filled the silence. "You'll regret wasting your time on this nonsense." My father sat at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on his plate, offering nothing. His silence, as always, said everything. I turned to my sister, hoping she might understand. Leslie leaned back in her chair, her expression detached. "You're throwing away your potential?" she said flatly, like she was rehearsing for court. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Even she couldn't see me. I grabbed the letter and left the table, my pulse thundering, my resolve hardening with every step. I wouldn't stay in a house that refused to believe in me. Packing was quick. I folded my clothes, my sketches, and my old Singer sewing machine into a single suitcase. The chipped machine had seen every late night and every dream I'd stitched together since I was 15. As I zipped the bag, my mother appeared in the doorway. "If you walk out that door," she said coolly, "don't expect us to help when this falls apart." I met her gaze. "I won't need your help," I said, brushing past her. My heart raced, but my steps didn't falter. New York hit like a storm, loud, fast, and unrelenting. The city's rhythm was nothing like Birmingham's stillness. Rent drained my savings, and even groceries felt like a luxury. The scholarship covered tuition, but nothing else. Within a week, I found a part-time job at a small fabric store in Brooklyn, cutting bolts of cotton and silk for designers who barely noticed me. The hours were long, the pay barely enough for a shared apartment with creaky floors and thin walls. But every night I'd pull my sewing machine onto the wobbly table and keep working. Each stitch felt like defiance, proof that I belonged here. Then the calls began. My mother's voice crackled through the phone, sharp as ever. "Meredith, it's your responsibility to support your family," she said. "Just a few hundred a month? You owe us that much." I froze, the phone warm against my ear. "Mom, I'm barely surviving here," I said. "You're in New York," she snapped. "Figure it out." My father never called. Leslie only texted about my classes, never about me. Their silence weighed heavier than the noise of the city. Eventually, I started sending what I could, $50 one month, $100 the next, because guilt was harder to ignore than hunger. Each check I mailed meant less fabric, fewer meals, but I told myself it was temporary. I was proving them wrong, showing that I could stand on my own. Still, every time I wrote their address on an envelope, something inside me tightened. The fabric store became both prison and refuge. I learned the textures of every cloth, the rhythm of the scissors, the sound of customers who would never know my name. Sometimes I'd overhear them brag about their latest runway shows or magazine features, and I'd imagine my designs on those pages instead. My professors said my work had an edge, but between shifts and assignments, I barely slept. New York demanded everything and gave nothing easily. Monica called often, her voice a small reminder of home. "You're doing amazing, Mer," she'd say, and for a moment I almost believed her. I told her about the scholarship, the store, the exhaustion. She listened, her laughter soft and grounding. But I never told her about the money I sent home. That secret sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't want pity. I wanted pride, my own. Winter came hard. My hands cracked from long hours at the store, and the radiator in my apartment rattled like it was coughing up its last breath. Some nights I'd stay awake listening to the hum of my sewing machine, the only sound that reminded me I was still fighting for something. Every new sketch I pinned to the wall was a small victory, a reminder that I hadn't come all this way for nothing. Still, doubt crept in. On nights when exhaustion blurred the lines on my drawings, I'd wonder if my mother had been right. Maybe I was chasing an illusion, trying to turn thread and fabric into proof of my worth. But the thought of going back, of walking into that Birmingham house and hearing her say, "I told you so," was unbearable, so I kept going. By spring, I had finished my first full collection for class. My professor called it raw, but fearless. I took that as the highest compliment. For the first time, I saw what my future could look like, something built entirely by my own hands. The city still scared me, but I was learning to move with its rhythm instead of against it. The calls from home didn't stop, though. My mother's demands grew more insistent, her tone sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "You should be grateful, Meredith," she'd say. "We raised you. You owe us." I'd hang up, sometimes guilt and anger tangling in my chest. I was chasing a dream, but I was still tethered to the life I'd tried to escape. I didn't know then how much harder it would get, or how the people I trusted most would test me again. But back then, in that tiny apartment with the city lights bleeding through the blinds, I felt unstoppable. My sewing machine hummed steady and defiant. Every stitch whispered the same promise: I was never going back. New York wasn't the dream I'd imagined, it was a grind. At 20, I was juggling design school and a job at the fabric store, my days blurring into lectures, sketches, and late-night shifts cutting bolts of cloth. My cramped apartment, shared with 2 other students, barely had space for my sewing machine, but I made it work. I'd stay up past midnight stitching samples under a flickering bulb, my hands sore, but my mind alive with ideas. Every design was a step toward proving I wasn't the pointless dreamer my mother claimed I was. The pressure never let up. My scholarship covered tuition, but rent, groceries, and fabric devoured my paycheck. I survived on instant noodles and coffee, saving every cent for supplies. Sometimes I sent $50 or $100 back to Birmingham whenever my mother called, her tone edged with expectation. "Family helps family," she'd say, and I'd bite back the urge to argue. My father stayed silent, and my sister's texts were brief, asking about grades, but never about me. The weight of their demands clung to me like wet fabric, heavy and suffocating. School wasn't much kinder. My professors praised my work, but the competition was fierce. Classmates flaunted polished portfolios, their families funding trips to fashion weeks or internships abroad. I had nothing but grit and my old Singer machine. I spent hours in the school's sewing studio, a dim basement filled with the hum of machines and the sharp scent of thread. I pushed harder, skipping meals, ignoring headaches, determined to keep up with everyone else. I told myself I could handle it all: classes, work, and the money I sent home. I had no choice. Then came the night I broke. I was in the studio working on a silk dress for critique. The clock read 2 a.m. and I hadn't eaten since noon. My vision blurred. My hands trembled and the room tilted. I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, the dress slipping from my grasp. A classmate found me and rushed me to the campus health center where a nurse handed me water and said I was dehydrated, exhausted, and dangerously run down. "You can't keep doing this," she warned gently. I nodded, but inside I was terrified. What if I couldn't keep up? What if my mother had been right all along? The next day I called Monica. She listened while I poured out everything: the endless work, the hunger, the fear. "You're stronger than this, she said softly. "You're living your dream." I clung to her words, grateful for her warmth. For a while her calls kept me afloat. I finished the silk dress, presented it, and earned an A. It felt like a small victory, a reminder that I could still win. But soon, the whispers began. I overheard a classmate at the fabric store say to a customer, "She's the one who ditched her family to chase some fashion fantasy." My stomach dropped. I recognized the phrasing. It was something Monica had once said. When I confronted her on our next call, "Did you tell people I abandoned my family?" She hesitated, then laughed lightly. I was just venting. People must have twisted my words." Her tone was breezy, but it didn't sit right. Still, I let it go. I didn't want to lose the one person who'd ever believed in me. The rumors spread like dye in water. Classmates whispered that I'd run off without a care, leaving my family behind. I wanted to scream that I was the one struggling, sending money I didn't have, starving to survive, but I stayed silent. Instead, I buried myself in work, took extra shifts, and kept sketching late into the night. Each design became a quiet rebellion, a threat of defiance against every voice that said I couldn't make it. Monica's calls grew infrequent, her tone distant. When I shared new projects, she changed the subject to Birmingham, to my sister's latest success. I didn't see it then, but she was pulling away sowing seeds that would one day turn poisonous. I was too focused on surviving to notice the betrayal taking root. Looking back, that collapse in the studio was a turning point. It forced me to slow down, to prioritize my health, but it didn't break me. I learned to budget smarter, to say no when my mother demanded money I didn't have. I stopped answering her angry voicemails. I kept designing each stitch, proof that I was building something beyond their doubts. The classmate who'd helped me that night became an unexpected ally, sharing notes when I missed lectures. I wasn't completely alone, and that gave me strength. I didn't know then how far Monica's words would travel, or how they'd come back to haunt me. But in those grueling days, with my sewing machine humming in the corner, I refused to let go of my dream. I was fighting for myself, and I wasn't giving up. Tucson felt like a fresh start, with its warm desert air and quiet nights. At 22, I had graduated from design school, my portfolio brimming with pieces that told my story, grit, defiance, and hope stitched into every seam. New York had nearly broken me, but it also made me stronger. I'd moved to Tucson, drawn by a job offer from a small startup focused on sustainable fashion. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, a chance to build something real away from the chaos of the city and the weight of my family's expectations. The startup was a tight-knit team working out of a sunlit studio filled with rolls of recycled fabric. I threw myself into designing a line of clothing made from upcycled materials: denim scraps, discarded linens, anything we could transform. My first collection, a series of bold jackets and flowing dresses, caught the attention of a local boutique. I'd spend days sketching, cutting, and sewing, my old singer humming as I shaped fabric into something new. My colleague, a quiet woman with a gift for marketing, encouraged me to submit my work to magazines. "You've got something special," she said, her voice steady with belief. I wasn't used to that kind of confidence, but it fueled me. Then came the call that changed everything. A Vogue editor wanted to feature my collection in an article about sustainable fashion. I remember standing in the studio, phone pressed to my ear, my heart racing as she described the piece. When it was published, my name, Meredith Hayes, appeared in print beside photos of my designs. I held the magazine, tracing the words with my fingers, feeling a pride I'd never known. My colleague organized a small celebration in the studio, with cheap wine and laughter echoing into the night. For the first time, I felt seen, not just as a dreamer, but as someone who had made it. But success carried a shadow. I'd hoped Monica, my friend from Birmingham, would share my excitement. I called her, eager to tell her about the feature. "Vogue Monica," I said, my voice bubbling. "Can you believe it?" Her response was clipped. "That's great, Mer," she said, but there was an edge to her tone, as if she were holding something back. I brushed it off, thinking she was just busy. But soon the calls stopped coming. Texts grew shorter. I told myself it was distance that friendships fade. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble came at a local fashion event in Tucson. While networking with boutique owners, a designer pulled me aside. "Is it true you borrowed money from your family to start your career?" she asked, brow furrowed. I froze, my stomach twisting. "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "I built this myself." She nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. The question resurfaced from colleagues, clients, even a small-time reporter. The rumor was spreading, and it wasn't hard to trace its source. I called Monica, my hands trembling. "You're telling people I took money from my family?" I asked quietly but firmly. She hesitated, then let out a brittle laugh. "Mir, I just said you had some help. It's not a big deal." But it was. The lie painted me as a fraud, someone who had cheated her way to success. It damaged my reputation, making clients question my integrity. The pride from the Vogue article turned sour, tainted by betrayal. "You were my friend," I said, my voice cracking. "How could you?" She didn't answer. She just hung up. The loneliness hit hard. Tucson had been my escape, but without Monica's friendship, I felt adrift. I'd already cut ties with my family, ignoring my mother's angry voicemails and my sister's hollow congratulations. My father remained silent as always. I'd built a life I was proud of, but the people I once trusted were tearing it down. Late at night, I'd sit by my sketches, wondering if I'd ever outrun their doubts. Then came a lifeline. My old professor from design school reached out after seeing the Vogue piece. She was in Tucson for a conference and invited me for coffee. Over steaming mugs, I told her everything: the rumors, the betrayal, the isolation. She listened, her eyes kind but sharp. "You've already proven them wrong," she said firmly. "Don't let their lies define you." She introduced me to a local designer who became my mentor, guiding me through the industry's politics. My colleague at the startup also stepped up, helping me pitch to new clients and rebuild my name. Their faith in me was a quiet strength, pulling me back from the edge. I poured myself into work again, designing with a fierceness I hadn't felt before. Each piece became a rebuttal to the rumors, a testament to my resilience. I started speaking at local events, sharing my story, not the version Monica told, but the truth of my struggle and perseverance. Clients returned, drawn to the authenticity in my work. The startup grew, my designs spread to more boutiques, and each sale felt like a small victory. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Looking back, Monica's betrayal had cut deep, but it also clarified what mattered. I had spent years chasing approval from people who refused to see me, my family, my friend, but I didn't need it anymore. My professor's encouragement, my colleagues' loyalty, and my own determination were enough. I was finally building a life that belonged entirely to me. Yet deep down, I knew the past wasn't finished. The family I'd left behind still lingered, voices waiting in the dark, ready to pull me back. 7 years after leaving, I stepped back into Birmingham's thick summer heat. At 25, I'd returned for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, a grand affair my mother had orchestrated down to the last detail. I hadn't wanted to come, but something, maybe a lingering need for closure, pulled me back. My life in Tucson was steady now, a growing career with a sustainable fashion startup, a small house I'd bought myself, and a name beginning to mean something in the industry. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore, yet walking into my childhood home still felt like stepping into a trap. The house overflowed with relatives and neighbors, the air heavy with perfume and chatter. My mother stood in the center, her smile practiced, her dress immaculate. My father hovered nearby, quiet as always, nodding politely at guests. My sister was there too, her lawyerly poise drawing admiring looks. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of wine, feeling like an outsider in the place that once was home. I dressed with intention, a tailored jacket from my own collection, a silent statement of who I'd become. But no one noticed, not at first. Dinner was served in the backyard beneath strings of lights glowing softly against the dusk. My mother raised a toast, her voice carrying over the clink of glasses. To 30 years, she set her eyes on my father, and to family, those who make us proud. She glanced at my sister, who smiled, then at me. Some children make you proud, she added, her tone cool. Others just exist. The words landed like a slap, echoing the same sting I'd felt years ago. The table fell silent, eyes flicking toward me. I gripped my fork, my pulse racing, but this time I refused to stay quiet. "Enough, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "You don't get to dismiss me anymore." She froze, her glass halfway to her lips. Guests shifted uneasily, but I didn't care. "I've built a life you can't ignore." I went on, standing now. "I own a home in Tucson, bought with my own money. My designs are in boutiques in Vogue. I didn't just exist, I became someone, no thanks to you." My mother's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing, but I met her gaze. "You never believed in me," I said quietly, "and I don't need you to anymore." The silence was suffocating, broken only by a cousin's awkward cough. My father stared down at his plate, his hands motionless. My sister shifted in her seat, expression unreadable. My mother set her glass down, her voice low and cutting. "You've always been dramatic, Meredith," she said. "Running off to chase your little hobby doesn't make you special." Her words were meant to wound, but they didn't. I'd heard them too many times before. "It's not a hobby," I replied, calm and clear. "It's my career, and I'm damn good at it." I turned to my sister, the one person I'd hoped might stand by me. "Leslie," I said sharply, "you knew about Monica's rumors, didn't you? That I supposedly borrowed money from Mom and Dad to get where I am." Her eyes widened, caught off guard. Murmurs rippled through the table. "You knew," I pressed, "and you said nothing." Leslie hesitated, her composure cracking. "I heard something," she admitted quietly, "but I didn't think it was my place to interfere." I laughed bitterly. "Not your place. You're my sister. You let her lie about me, let people think I'm a fraud, and you did nothing." The air felt electric, every gaze fixed on us. Leslie looked down, fingers twisting her napkin. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, but the words rang hollow. My mother cut in, her tone sharp. "This is a celebration, Meredith. Stop making a scene." But I was done playing their game. "You don't get to control this," I said, turning toward her. "You don't get to rewrite my story to fit your version. I'm not your failure." I set my glass down, the clink loud in the silence, and walked toward the house. Inside, I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. A few relatives tried to stop me with empty pleasantries, but I brushed past them. My father caught my arm at the door, his eyes meeting mine for the first time that night. "Meredith," he said softly, but he stopped, the words dying on his lips. I pulled away. "It's too late, Dad," I said, and stepped into the night. The drive to my hotel was a blur, Birmingham streets both familiar and distant. Anger burned beneath my skin at my mother's cruelty, my sister's silence, my father's absence. Yet beneath it all was something steadier, confidence. I'd faced them. I'd said what I'd kept buried for years. I wasn't the girl who'd left with a suitcase and a sewing machine. I was a woman who had built her own life and earned her place. Leaving that party early wasn't running away, it was choosing myself. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the bed staring at my reflection in the window. Birmingham had tried to make me small again, but it failed. I thought of Tucson, my studio, my designs, the people who believed in me. My mother's words, my sister's betrayal. even Monica's lies couldn't touch that. I'd proven them wrong, not with talk, but with every choice I'd made. As I packed for my flight back to Arizona, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready for whatever came next. A few months later, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. I was in my Tucson studio, surrounded by sketches and fabric swatches, the hum of my sewing machine steady and comforting. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. After the anniversary party, I'd hoped for silence from my family, but Patricia's name flashing on the caller ID sent a chill through me. I answered, bracing myself. Meredith. My mother's voice was sharp, stripped of warmth. I saw your little feature in Vogue. You're doing well for yourself. Her tone wasn't congratulatory, it was calculating. You owe us, she continued. We raised you, and now you're flaunting your success while we get nothing. Start sending money again, or I'll tell everyone online that you scammed your way to the top. My stomach twisted. The threat was clear, a blade aimed at the reputation I'd fought to build. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. I'm done, Mom, I said quietly. I don't owe you anything. I built this life myself. She laughed, a cold, cutting sound. You think you're untouchable? She sneered. I'll make sure everyone knows you're a fraud. Before I could respond, the line went dead. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, her words echoing in my head. I'd faced her cruelty before, but this time it was deliberate, vengeful. The next day, my sister called. Leslie's voice was calm but cold, her tone like a closing argument. You need to listen to Mom, she said. If you don't help, we'll post online that you lied about your success, that you used family money. I clenched my jaw, anger burning low in my chest. You don't get to threaten me, Leslie, I replied evenly. You stood by while Monica spread lies, and now you're doing the same. I'm not afraid of you. She paused. You're making a mistake, she said finally. I hung up, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. My father never called. His silence, as always, spoke louder than words. I sat in my studio staring at the phone, their threats pressing down like a weight. They thought they could control me, drag me back into their world of guilt and manipulation. But I wasn't the girl who'd left Birmingham with a suitcase and a dream. I had a career, a home, a name, and I wasn't about to let them tarnish it. That night, I turned to a fashion forum where designers shared stories and advice. My hands shook as I typed, but my voice was clear. I told my truth, how I'd left home. At 18, worked myself raw in New York and built everything without a cent of family help. I wrote about my mother's demands, my sister's silence, and their new threats. I'm not a fraud, I finished. I'm a designer who fought for every step. Then I hit post, my heart hammering. The response was overwhelming. Designers, clients, even strangers shared their own experiences with toxic families and manipulation. Some offered words of encouragement, others practical advice on protecting my reputation. A local boutique owner invited me to speak at a panel. My colleague read my post and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, she said softly. For the first time, I felt surrounded by people who believed in my truth. But the fallout came fast. My mother left venomous voicemails. You've humiliated us, she hissed. You'll regret this. Leslie texted, furious that I'd aired family business. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked their numbers one by one. My hands didn't shake this time. I hesitated only at my father's contact, but he'd never stood up for me, never once spoken in my defense. I blocked him too. Monica's number had long been erased. I was done with all of them. In the days that followed, calm returned. My studio became my refuge again, a place of creation, not fear. I designed new pieces, bolder and freer, each stitch a declaration of independence. Their threats had rattled me, but they also reminded me of what I'd already overcome. My family didn't define me. Their words, their greed, their lies, they were chains I'd already broken. Now I was truly free. I didn't know what waited ahead, but I was ready to face it on my own terms. My life in Tucson, my work, my truth, they were mine. And this time, no one could take them away. Back in Tucson, my apartment glowed with candlelight for my 30th birthday. At 30, I stood in a life I'd built from scratch, a thriving design career, a cozy home filled with my sketches, and a peace I'd never known. I'd invited the people who mattered: my old professor who'd guided me through doubt, my colleague who'd believed in my work, a single mother from next door who balanced 2 jobs and a toddler with fierce grace, and an artist down the street whose family had once rejected his dreams. These were my people now, not bound by blood, but by shared struggle and quiet strength. My family wasn't invited. They didn't deserve a place here. The living room buzzed with laughter, the table covered with homemade dishes and half-empty bottles of wine. My colleague raised a glass, her eyes warm. "To Meredith," she said, "for proving what's possible." I smiled, heart full, as everyone clinked glasses. The single mother told stories of her daughter's first steps, her voice bright despite her exhaustion. The artist sketched a quick portrait of me on a napkin, grinning as he handed it over. "You're one of us," he said, and I felt it, a belonging I'd never known in Birmingham. This was my family, chosen and true. As the night wound down, my old professor pulled me aside. "I heard something from a mutual acquaintance," she said carefully. "Your mother's reputation in Birmingham has taken a hit. People are talking about how she treated you after your post." I nodded, unsurprised. I'd told my truth online, and word had spread. "They avoid her at community events now," my professor added. "And your sister lost a few clients. Her firm's name got caught up in the scandal." I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel guilt either. Patricia and Leslie had made their choices. These were the consequences. I thought back to the years of demands, my mother's sharp voicemails, my sister's threats, my father's silence. I'd blocked their numbers long ago and built a wall around my heart. Hearing about their struggles now felt distant, like news from a life I'd already left behind. I didn't need their approval or their presence to feel whole. My apartment, filled with warmth and laughter, was proof of that. I'd created a world where I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The party ended with hugs and promises to meet again. I stood by the door, watching my guests disappear into the Tucson night, their voices fading beneath the desert stars. I cleaned up slowly, stacking plates, folding napkins, letting the quiet settle. My colleague had left a note on the table. "You've built something beautiful." I smiled, tucking it into my pocket. She was right. This life, my work, my home, my chosen family, was mine, earned through every late night and hard-won victory. Looking back, I realized how far I'd come. I'd left Birmingham with nothing but a sewing machine and a dream, fought through exhaustion and betrayal, and built a name in a world that tried to dismiss me. My mother's words, my sister's lies, Monica's rumors, they'd all tried to hold me back, but they failed. I'd found strength in people who saw me, who shared my fight. The single mother, the artist, my professor, my colleague, they weren't just guests at my table. They were my foundation. And so, to anyone listening, I want to say this. You don't need their approval to build your own world. Not your family's, not your friends, not the voices that tell you you're not enough. Choose the ones who lift you up, who share your table. Find your people, the ones who see your worth and hold them close. Create a life that's yours, stitch by stitch, and don't let anyone tear it apart. Your value isn't in their eyes, it's in the world you build, the one you choose to call home.